Welcome to the TTS Talking Educators podcast. Each week we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe offering exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in the early years and primary settings. Hello, my name is Mark Loveday, your host for this week's TTS Talking Educators podcast. I'm the headmaster at Fruin College, an independent co-educational day and boarding school for students aged 7 to 19, specialising in dyslexia and co-occurring specific learning difficulties. I'm a specialist teacher, an SLE, Specialist Leader of Education for SEND, and have taught across primary, secondary and sixth form in both mainstream and specialist settings, holding a variety of leadership roles. I've previously set up and led SEND advisory teaching services, been responsible for the creation of diagnostic pathways for dyslexia, dyscalculia and dyspraxia, and created and led an alternative provision for students experiencing emotional-based school avoidance, which went on to win Alternative Provision of the Year in 2023. I'm also a board director for the Specific Learning Difficulties Assessment Standards Committee, known as SASC, a trustee of a multi-academy trust, and am a national and international speaker. Throughout the series, we'll be discussing a range of topics aimed at supporting SEN in primary settings, inspiring you with guidance and resources to enhance your practice. I'm delighted to introduce Emma Jordan as today's guest. Welcome to the podcast, Emma. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Mark. Lovely to see you.
And you. Before we get started, could you give a bit of an introduction to yourself for our listeners?
So I'm Emma. I'm a speech and language therapist. This year marks my 30th year in the NHS.
Wow.
I'm proud to say. My clinical work is out in mainstream schools. I work with children primary age predominantly, with speech, language and communication needs. And I am the co-service lead for the Children's Speech and Language Therapy Service here in Worcestershire. We're a large team, around about 80 speech and language therapists and assistant practitioners. And we work across schools and settings to support children aged 0 to 19 with speech, language and communication difficulties. You'll find us online if you want to go and find us and find out what kind of things we get up to. But we're a very creative and innovative team, keen to find new ways of working and new ways of working together to support children effectively in their settings.
Brilliant. Thank you, Emma. Fantastic. In the first episode, we'll be looking at the importance of early intervention to support pupils and the roles that those early years practitioners and primary practitioners can play. So if we think about those kind of early years settings to start with, Emma, what would you say are the kind of the key trigger points or how easy or tools that could be used in terms of that early identification of need?
I think we've seen a shift, haven't we, Mark, in the last 10 years with early years settings being far more able to identify children very early on with speech, language and communication needs or difficulties or differences. And typically in the past, our health visitor colleagues played a huge part in identifying children when they had their 2.5-year check. And what we've noticed in Worcestershire is a shift in that we're seeing children far earlier than 2.5. Children are being identified by their early years setting earlier, or parents are becoming concerned about their child's communication skills earlier than that. And I think there's a range of tools now available for early years settings. Depending on where you are in the country, there's lots of different things available. Here in Worcestershire, we were fortunate to be involved in Every Child a Talker. So we're talking 2 governments ago, we're talking not this Labour government, the Labour government before. They introduced Every Child a Talker, and that made a huge difference. It's something we've maintained here in Worcestershire in terms of identifying children very early on, giving early years settings tools that they can use to monitor children's progress and their development, and spotting children very early on who might be experiencing some difficulties developing their talking or their understanding or their use of speech or their communication skills. And so there are lots of tools available that are free online that early years settings or schools and nurseries can access. You can find tools on the SLCN, Speech, Language and Communication Needs Pathway. there's the Worcestershire pathway that sits within what's called the balanced system pathway. So in Worcestershire, we're a balanced system service. Maybe we can talk about what that means a little bit later on.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there are lots of tools on there that you can download that will help you to identify children really early on, as well as there being tools that settings can use that they can buy in, such as Welcome, which I think you're already familiar with, Mark.
Absolutely. That is a really good tool as well, isn't it, in terms of a brought-in tool and a screening tool. In terms of those settings that may not have that access or feel confident in terms of those early signs, what should they be looking for? So we've kind of got the assessments that really help drill down a little bit further and help with the kind of a screening. But if they don't have access to that, or they're not necessarily confident in their use, what would be your kind of top tips in terms of what they could look for?
I think when it comes to speech, language and communication needs, what people often say to us in education settings is we just don't know where to start. Where do we start? Because it's complicated, isn't it? We're talking about a whole range of different skills. But if we break that down into children's language skills, so words and sentences that they can understand, whether they can follow instructions or follow the routine or understand what they're expected to do or listen or respond. And then we can think about children's use of their language, so the words and sentences they're using themselves. Then you can think about communication skills, so how they're using those words and sentences to communicate effectively with adults or with their peers or with their friends, and whether that's working or whether they're finding that difficult. And then you can think about speech, so their use of speech sounds when they're actually talking, the sounds that they're using. So what you're looking for are children who might find it a little bit tricky to listen or look in the right direction, or tune in to the right thing, or they're confused when they're given instructions. They might be the last to do what's been asked of them. You might notice that they're copying other children. You might notice that they're waiting for other children to respond and then they'll copy them. You might notice children who are trying to communicate with you, but their sentences don't make sense, or they're not really putting sentences together. They're just using words and their words might not be very specific. Or you might notice a difference in their sounds, in that it might be a bit hard to understand them, or it might need a familiar listener to work out what they're trying to say to you. So you're looking across all of those speech, language and communication skills and thinking about understanding and talking as well as speech and the speech sounds. The children with speech sound difficulties are often quite easy to spot because you can hear it. Yeah. It's children who are finding it hard to understand that are often more difficult to pick out.
Absolutely, that kind of difference between that expressive and that receptive in terms of their language. Also, I think really important to point out the importance of having a hearing check and having conversations with families just around, have you had their hearing checked? Have you noticed any difficulties around your child's hearing? And I think for me, certainly, it's about how do you phrase those conversations, because actually that have you noticed something different in your child's hearing may elicit the response of no. But if you go and drill down a bit deeper, such as have you noticed that they turn the television up really loud, or you're calling their name and they're not responding? So I would always say rule out hearing as a kind of starting point as well. What would your thoughts on that be?
Yeah, absolutely. You want to know whether children can hear and how well they can hear as well, especially as children are moving through early years into reception. So when we get into reception, we're really fine-tuning listening and hearing, aren't we? Because we're thinking about tuning into individual sounds, which is very different from listening to a whole sentence or following a whole instruction. It's really fine-tuning that listening and that discrimination, really hearing the difference between sounds. So there'll be some children who can hear to a certain level, but actually they might be struggling with discriminating between sounds or between words, or hearing the difference between words. So you want to try and explore that a little bit and find out if there are any times when it's difficult for them to hear, or if parents have noticed that there's a difference, or that they might mishear something that you've said or misunderstand something that you've said. But lots of children will experience what we call a conductive hearing loss. So they'll experience some level of hearing loss because they've got a cough or a cold, or they're and that can come and go in the winter months in particular. So there'll be some children who will experience that, and it'll be a fluctuating hearing loss. So it's up and down. So you've got to keep your eye on that kind of thing too.
You have. And I think it's also to kind of differentiate as well between what is that auditory discrimination and that auditory processing. And I think, there are a lot of settings that get really confused about that. I know you and I have had lots of conversations over the years around auditory processing disorder. But that auditory discrimination at its basic form really is distinguishing between two very, separate but similar sounds. And there's plenty that early year settings can be doing with that, isn't there, in terms of sound walks, barrier games?
Yeah, absolutely. And listening for everyday sounds, listening for big sounds, and discriminating between instrument sounds, and just tuning in to listening for sounds without that visual support as well, because you're really trying to fine tune children's listening just to sound and auditory information in what is becoming a more visual world, where we're all quite reliant on visual all of us are becoming more reliant on visual information. It's there to prop us up all of the time.
It really is. And, I think, across the series, we've talked about the importance of that use of visuals to support. But when you're looking at trying to discriminate, can they actually hear those discrete sounds? It's important we're removing that, so we haven't kind of got those cues to support that at that moment in time. Thinking about moving into a busy classroom or a busy nursery setting, that can be quite challenging, can't it, in terms of children discriminating particular sounds or their name. In those types of settings, what would be your recommendations in terms of working with students to try and unpick this?
It's all about context, isn't it, Mark? It's about looking at a child's skills, and if they're finding it easy to access some opportunities and less easy to access other opportunities, and having different opportunities in a classroom environment where there is space to do things that are, quieter activities. I'm sure that you and I can both think of brilliant reception classrooms and wonderful nursery environments that are very well organised in terms of the spaces that are available that children can move through, and the opportunity for some small group as well as some busy areas. And it's looking at children's responses and giving them opportunity to develop those skills across lots of different environments. But it is hard because we are working in large, busy environments, and we are trying to develop children's listening skills. And as children progress and develop their listening skills, being able to listen yourself and demonstrate listening skills, and for a year group to be able to demonstrate listening skills, means everybody can listen. So everyone's got a better, a chance of being able to listen if the whole class is listening, and you haven't got a lot of background noise that's been made just by that many bodies being in the classroom.
No, and I think, all of this leading into this social and emotional health as well, isn't it? And the well-being, and the fact that actually if they haven't got that communication, if they haven't got those levels of that expressive language or that understanding, that receptive, or indeed the ability to take turns and listen, those barriers become more and more pronounced as they go through school.
Yeah, so we know that if you're experiencing a communication difficulty or a speech language difficulty at age 5, then there will be an impact in terms of you're, less likely to do well later on by the age of 11 if you've still got that difficulty in terms of attainment. So we know that there's an impact on academic access and opportunity. There's a direct link, obviously, communication underpins everything. It underpins all of your learning. So that direct link is there, but there's also the impact socially in terms of being able to communicate effectively, to make friends, to get along, to work alongside and to play alongside, to negotiate in your play, to have a positive social interaction or social experience or a play experience, and to form those bonds when you first start in nursery or school, to make friends, even early friendships, and playing alongside and doing that successfully. And of course, longer term, yes, it does have an impact on your mental health, because if you're finding all of those things difficult, it's hard.
It really is. It really is. And I know this is a topic you and I could just talk for absolute hours on, but We must bring this first episode to a close. It's been an absolute pleasure. I think, the big takeaways really are there are a lot of tools out there, as Emma signposted, in terms of those free resources that can really help you signpost and dig a little bit deeper to help you understand your little bunnies in your classroom. So I'd like to say a huge thank you to Emma for joining us and providing such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Educators podcast with me, Mark Loveday, and Emma Jordan. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your settings and links to relevant resources. And I know we'll get those links up that Emma's mentioned as well. So thank you very much, Emma.